Out of thin air, how debt breaks the laws of scarcity. Introduction. Every economic system, from high-frequency trading desks to national governments, revolves around a simple challenge: how to allocate scarce resources to meet human wants. At first glance, the actors in these systems, banks, businesses, market makers, appear to play different games. But look closer, and a unifying logic emerges: arbitrage. They all seek to buy low, sell high, and extract value from the spread between inputs and outputs. Yet something breaks down when we examine the modern banking system more deeply. Unlike market makers who must acquire goods before selling them, banks can create their inventory debt out of thin air. Through fractional reserve lending, they extend credit backed by only a fraction of real reserves. That credit then chases real goods, services, and assets, things constrained by physical limits, energy, and time. The result? Inflation, asset bubbles, and distorted signals about where resources are truly needed. This exposition traces that breakdown. We begin with the logic of arbitrage, explore how banking bends that logic, and show how this disconnect contributes to systemic fragility. Then we pivot to possibility, mapping a new design space of resource allocation mechanisms that might restore thermodynamic sanity to an increasingly abstract economy. Arbitrage as a universal economic logic. Arbitrage isn't just a trading tactic. It's a principle that underpins how value is extracted in every business model. Whether you're a retailer sourcing goods at wholesale and selling at retail, or a liquidity provider on a crypto exchange, your role is to identify mismatches in price, risk, or access, and profit from resolving them. Market makers are the purest expression of this logic. They quote both buy and sell prices, aiming to earn a spread while holding as little inventory as possible. Their profit is a reward for bearing short-term volatility risk and providing liquidity to others. But the key constraint is risk. Market makers must carefully manage exposure. They can't conjure assets. They must source, price, and hold them. This tether to the real cost of capital creates discipline. It keeps arbitrage grounded in reality. Banking and debt, the engine of inflation. Banks, however, operate under a different set of rules. Thanks to fractional reserve banking and state-granted licenses, they can originate credit without first securing equivalent assets. When a bank makes a loan, it effectively creates money: an IOU from the borrower, booked as an asset, and a matching deposit credited to the borrower's account. That deposit can be used immediately to purchase real goods: land, labor, commodities, or intellectual property. But the bank did not first acquire those goods. It merely created a claim on them. In thermodynamic terms, it injected demand into the system without any corresponding input of energy or material. Multiply this across an entire economy, and the pattern becomes clear. Debt expands, demand rises, but the real-world supply of productive resources lags behind. This drives prices up, not because of increased value, but because of increased purchasing power chasing limited goods. In effect, banking arbitrage breaks the scarcity constraint. It pretends value can be created ex nihilo. But unlike software or ideas, real-world systems are governed by entropy, energy, and limits. Scarcity, inflation, and the breakdown of coordination. The immediate consequence of this imbalance is inflation. But the deeper consequence is a breakdown in coordination. Prices are supposed to signal where resources are scarce, directing capital to where it's needed most. But when money itself is abundant and unconstrained, price signals become noisy. Housing bubbles form not because more homes are needed, but because credit is cheap. Stocks soar not because companies are more productive, but because debt-financed buybacks inflate valuations. Governments spend without limits, misallocating resources while distorting future expectations. The system becomes increasingly fragile. Leverage builds. Asset prices decouple from fundamentals. And when the tide turns, when interest rates rise or risk sentiment changes, the entire illusion collapses in waves of liquidation, unemployment, and recession. This isn't just inefficient. It's a fundamental failure of our economic operating system. This content is brought to you by Bobby Giggs. Promote your brand here and reach a wide audience across platforms like YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook. Follow the links in the description to get started. All systems as resource allocation engines. Strip away the financial jargon and ideological labels, and every economic actor, be it a bank, startup, DAO, or central planner, is ultimately a resource allocator. That is their function, to take inputs, capital, labor, materials, energy, and direct them toward outputs that, ideally, exceed the cost of those inputs. This is the essence of real economic productivity. It's not measured by how much money circulates or how much debt is issued, but by how much value is created. Real GDP, properly understood, is the net output of useful goods and services, what remains after accounting for energy spent, raw materials used, and labor consumed. Economies thrive when they allocate capital toward productive ventures, innovations, infrastructure, regenerative systems. They falter when capital is allocated toward consumption, speculation, or entropy. This reframing makes clear why the mechanics of debt issuance matter so much. If capital is being created and allocated without constraints, without a tether to productivity, then misallocation is not a bug, but a feature. The economy drifts from signal to noise. VI, the spectrum of allocation models. So how should resources be allocated? Historically, two dominant models have competed. A, command and control systems. These are centralized bureaucracies, governments, or planning agencies that decide who gets what based on national goals, ideological frameworks, or top-down assessments of need. Strengths: can mobilize quickly during crisis, useful for large-scale infrastructure or wartime coordination. Weaknesses: fragile to errors, bottlenecks, low adaptability, poor feedback loops. B, free market systems. Here, prices emerge from the interactions of countless buyers and sellers. Resources are allocated based on willingness to pay, risk appetite, and perceived value. Strengths: resilient, decentralized, encourages innovation and experimentation. Weaknesses: vulnerable to externalities, can concentrate wealth and distort access, speculative bubbles. Most economies exist on a spectrum between these extremes, blending regulation with free exchange, public investment with private initiative. But this binary still limits imagination. It leaves out a critical question. What if there are alternative allocators, new models, built on emerging tools, values, and feedback systems that offer superior coordination without collapsing into control or chaos? Beyond the binary, emerging allocation paradigms, a new design space is opening up, enabled by cryptographic trust, programmable logic, decentralized identity, and digital coordination layers. These emerging paradigms are not utopian replacements, but complementary allocators that address weaknesses in the old models. Let's briefly explore a few. 1. Protocol-based allocators. Automated systems, like DeFi liquidity pools, use hard-coded rules to allocate capital transparently and impersonally. Example: Uniswap adjusts prices and capital distribution based on a mathematical curve. Impact: enables permissionless access to liquidity without a central market maker. 2. Reputation-weighted systems. These rely on earned trust, history, or identity to allocate power, resources, or voting rights. Example: Coordinate and Gitcoin use social graphs to distribute funding based on peer recognition. Impact: aligns incentives with long-term contribution and integrity. 3. Game theoretic incentive design. These systems reward impact after the fact, allocating capital based on measured outcomes. Example: retroactive public goods funding, retro PGF by optimism. Impact: encourages experimentation by de-risking initial funding. 4. Ecological biomimetic models. Inspired by nature's cycles, these models prioritize regeneration, feedback, and circular flows. Example: token economies where usage depletes tokens unless replenished through productive contribution. Impact: discourages extraction and encourages system balance. 5. Intent-based routing. In networks of autonomous agents, expressed human or machine intent guides resource matching in real time. Example: AI agents routing computation, bandwidth, or goods based on local and global priorities. Impact: minimizes waste and matches supply to demand dynamically. These models don't pretend to be silver bullets, but they offer alternative pathways to allocating scarce resources without depending solely on state decrees or market speculation. 8. Implications for the future. The shift away from debt-driven allocation and toward new paradigms is not just technical, it's philosophical. It invites us to ask, what kind of economy do we want to build, and what values should it reflect? Transition without collapse. One of the greatest challenges is that existing systems, particularly those built on fiat credit and leverage, are deeply entrenched. Attempting to replace them abruptly risks financial instability, political upheaval, and social dislocation. A more viable path is gradual modular transition. Layer new allocators on top of legacy systems. Use opt-in models, e.g. DAOs, parallel currencies, regenerative local economies. Allow success and adoption to emerge from functionality, not force. What makes a sustainable allocator? To avoid replicating the same failures in new form, these emerging allocators must meet three criteria. 1. Thermodynamic honesty. Allocation must be tethered to real productivity or energy flow, not illusions of infinite credit. 2. Adaptive feedback loops. Mechanisms must learn from outcomes, not just follow static rules or ideological dogma. 3. Transparent, trustworthy governance. Systems must be legible, upgradable, and accountable to their participants, not black boxes or technocratic elites. The role of technology. Blockchain, AI, cryptography, and digital identity give us the tools to coordinate at scale without requiring central control. But tools are neutral. Their value depends on how they're used and who they're used for. The future lies not in replacing one allocator with another, but in designing a mesh of interoperable allocators, each optimized for a different context, resource type, or timescale. A polycentric modular economic landscape. IX conclusion. The illusion that we can generate wealth out of thin air through infinite debt is no longer sustainable. It distorts our economies, breaks the feedback loops that make resource allocation effective, and inflates false signals that misguide innovation, consumption, and production. At its core, this is a story about entropy. We cannot indefinitely print claims on resources without producing or regenerating the real goods that anchor them. Debt, when unconstrained by scarcity, becomes a parasite on the very system it's meant to fund. The solution is not a return to rigid central planning or unfettered speculation. It is a reboot of allocation itself, grounded in transparency, feedback, resilience, and thermodynamic truth. Whether through smart protocols, social trust, regenerative flows, or autonomous agents, the emerging economic systems of the future will succeed not by avoiding scarcity, but by respecting it and learning to allocate within its limits.